What's up, everybody? Ramey here, otherwise known as Dr. Ray, and today what we're talking about are instructional strategies. I get a lot of questions about these, a lot of confusion from my students, and over the past few years, I've done a few other instructional strategy videos. I've written about it in my book, but my thoughts about them have changed a little bit. Mostly in the way that I organize them. I've found that the way that they're organized in a lot of instructional design books, the way that they're explained to people is just not practical, and it's not something that people take in and really get what they are and how to apply them, because I think that the way we've broken them down kind of confuses people. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to make it really simple to kind of go through and talk about instructional strategies, what they are, and how they fit into the bigger instructional design process, and how to utilize them. All right. Okay, so the first question is, where do instructional strategies even fit into the equation, and what are they? So instructional strategies fit into the equation. If we're talking about generic ISD, a generic ID like ADDIE process, they would fit into the design and development process. Instructional strategies inform your design and inform your development. They're the things that kind of they're like the biggest things. Like if there's like a big thing I want people to come away with, like when they understand ID, it's like, what are the instructional strategies you used for this instruction? Like that's it. So I also find a lot of people when they talk about like different instructional strategies like Gagne's, they're like confused, like can I use ADDIE and Gagne's, or how do those work together? As I said, instructional strategies fit into design and development stages within ADDIE or whatever ID model flavor of the week you want to use. Whatever one you're using, it doesn't matter. You are using instructional strategies. So let's kind of talk about them. Now, when I first wrote about them in my book, I broke them out into three types, which are organizational, delivery, and development. And I'm going to get into specifics, but I broke them out into three types. I got those three types from Smith and Reagan's book that was written in like the 80s, early 80s. I mean, they wrote a bunch of versions. I was using like the late 90s version or early 2000s version, but like it's an old philosophy. More recent books, for some reason, in our field have moved away from that and just describe them as instructional strategies. And I actually think it's confusing. And it's definitely confusing my students that I'm seeing. And it's definitely confusing people in the field, because I talk to them about this. They don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm like, how this is so important. You got to know this stuff. So what I've done is I've broken them out into categories and subcategories to hopefully make them make more sense. All right, so let's go through instructional strategies. I'm going to explain what they are so that you understand how to implement them in your instruction, into your e-learning, into your face-to-face training, whatever you're developing, you're implementing these things and you know how to do it. All right. So the first type of instructional strategies we have are organizational. Organizational. What does that mean? That's how we're organizing our instruction. That's the organization. That is the lesson plan of our instruction. Examples include Gagne's 9 events, Dick and Carey's instructional strategies model, not to be confused with Dick and Carey's ID model. Dick and Carey's instructional strategies model is an organizational instructional strategy, and the one that I wrote about in my book, let's say Pasteur's instructional strategy model. But Gagne's 9 events is the main one that we all use. This is, the first part's like motivate your learners, and then write your learning objectives, inform the learners what they're going to learn, and then present the content and get your learners to learn somehow, and all that stuff. Assess them, feedback, all that good stuff. Gagne's 9 events is really nothing but a lesson plan. It is a template for a lesson plan so that the first instructional strategy is an organizational. How are you organizing your content? I'm going to use this template. It's basically what Gagne is, a template. So that okay, I'm using Gagne. Inform the learners, get them motivated and engaged to start. Well, darn, of course, that makes sense. I would do that, but not everyone does. And they don't follow these templates, and then they run into problems with their training. Now, the next type of instruction, so there's organizational. There's no subcategories in organizational. It is organizational. Now, The next type of instructional strategy is a delivery strategy. And there are two subtypes. Two subtypes. The first type of delivery strategy is a motivational and engagement strategy. Motivational and engagement. Because we need to figure out how we are going to motivate our learners. Like Gagne said, first step, motivate. So how do we do that? We pick a motivational and engagement instructional strategy. Examples. How do we engage learners? Well, there's all kinds of theories and all kinds of stuff out there that tells us how to do it. We can use Keller's ARCs, which is a motivational model in instructional design. We can use things like gamification. We can present learners with multiple kinds of media to keep them engaged. We can add discussion boards and discussion questions to make them engaged. We can add group work and activities to keep them engaged. We can chunk our information to keep it less boring. There's lots of things in the research that we can do to keep our learners engaged and to motivate them. Second instructional strategies, delivery. First subtype of that is motivation and engagement. All right. Second subtype of delivery instructional strategies is learning. It's a pretty important one for instructional designers. How am I getting y'all to learn? How are you going to learn? How am I getting my learners to learn? What am I going to do? This is something I ask people during interviews. I'm like, they tell me about like their training and they're like, I used the ADDIE model, and they're using like generic terminology like ADDIE, and maybe they're like multimedia principles. They heard that somewhere. And I'm like, what did you use to get people to learn? And what informed that decision to use that strategy? Important kind of stuff that people should know. All right, so the second subtype of delivery is how am I getting them to learn? Examples include problem-based learning, game-based learning, scenarios, visual cues like different kinds of think alouds or things I'm going to do to get people to reflect. For example, knowledge checks. Anything I'm doing to get someone to stop, pause, reflect on what they're doing, any kind of visual cue like that. Merrill's principles of instruction, direct instruction. Now, when I say direct instruction, I'm referring to the type where we're getting people to learn the instructional strategy, because there's also an organizational strategy called direct instruction. So that word gets confused sometimes with what people are referring to. So make sure you're looking at the instructional strategy for learning direct instruction. Anyway, I get off topic so quickly because there's just so much stuff I'd love to talk about. So we have in the delivery instructional strategy, we have motivational and engagement. So how are we motivating and engaging the learners? What are all the things we can do? Then we have delivery learning. How am I getting my learners to learn? What am I doing? And there's a plethora of instructional strategies for motivation, engagement, and learning. I listed like 5 to 10 for you guys, just kickoff points, the starting points. You should know 50 different ways. I'm just going through. All right. So we get to the third instructional strategy. Now this one also has two subtypes, just like delivery. And this one is development. Your development strategies. So the first two, organization and delivery, we really use in the design phase of ADDIE. The development we obviously use in the development phase of ADDIE. But when I'm designing instruction, I'm thinking of these three instructional strategies throughout front-end analysis, from front-end analysis on like the whole time, because they guide everything. When I'm giving a client a solution, I really need to think of these instructional strategies. All right, so the first subtype of development is called cognition or cognitive learning. And I'm playing with words, like what do I want to call it when I write my book? But it's cognition, it's cognitive is the first subtype. And that is, what am I doing? What are the best practices I'm going to use to get my learners to be able to learn the content? Like, what am I going to do to reduce cognitive load and get my learners focused on the content? So, different ways to do that. We have cognitive theory of multimedia learning and working memory principles, which has spawned the multimedia principles, multimedia theories around that, and the multimedia principles. So how do I get my learners? What are the best practices to reduce cognitive load? Things like multimedia, generic multimedia principle, dual coding. Any of those strategies I can use to reduce working memory load on my learner. I'm trying to improve the cognitive resources and enhance, or should I say maximize, their cognitive ability as they're learning. All right, so that's the first development strategy that we have, cognition. The second development subtype of development that we have is interface design. Interface design. And within the interface design, because a lot of people, within interface design, we have a bunch of theories. So first of all, we have the multimedia principles, which a lot of instructional designers use Meyer's multimedia principles. I've interviewed Meyer. You can see my interview with him. You should totally check it out. Super cool guy. Really nice, down to earth, great guy to talk to. But Meyer's multimedia principles, which I noticed I also mentioned them in cognition. They hit on multiple levels, and that's okay. Why not? We're not talking about like some kind of laws here. Like, we're talking about some instructional principles. Like, yeah, they improve cognition, and they help us with the interface, because the multimedia principle, like I'm going to use images and text, sound, like how I'm interacting with that interface is going to be affected by the multimedia principles. But we have more than the multimedia principles. A lot of instructional designers, for some odd reason, the multimedia principles, I would talk about them 7 years ago, and people would be like, what is that? I never heard of that. All of a sudden, everyone knows about that, but we've all of a sudden stopped focusing on all the other graphic design and human-computer interaction and software development and software engineering principles that guide interface design. And we need to come back to that, because there's a lot more than the multimedia principles to interface design. The biggest one is design theory, which really guides how we design the whole entire interface. If you're not familiar with design theory, look it up and learn how to design interfaces. We got design theory, color theory, Fitts law, just different things like that we need to focus on as instructional designers. And those are the types of things we should know when we're designing interfaces. All right, so those are my instructional strategies. They are all formed like the hardware we're choosing, the software we're choosing, the LMS. And when I say like I'm thinking about these instructional strategies while I design instruction from the beginning, from my front-end analysis, because like the hardware, software, LMS solution, all of those pieces of those equation helps inform what instructional strategies are going to be good, what I can use, what I should use when I'm developing. So just to go through all of them really quick and to list them all out here, we have organizational strategies, which is for organizing content. We have two types of delivery. We have motivational and engagement, and we have delivery, how are we getting our people to learn? Then for development, we have cognition, cognitive load, cognitive, whatever we want to call that. I'm working on that title. And we have development, interface design. And those are our instructional strategies. And looking at it divided up like this starts to make it a little easier to think about what we need to do. Because when we're designing instruction, we're using all of these. So people are like confused. They're like, the model I'm using is Gagne's 9 events. And it's like, okay, well, what are you using for learning then? Because in Gagne's 9 events, like Gagne literally says, like, present content to your learners. What strategies are you using for learning there? And when you're presenting, what are you developing? And how are you reducing cognitive load? And how are you doing this? And how are you doing that? So like, yeah, we use like, when I'm developing instruction, I will use like 10 different things to develop, like 10 different theories, models, whatever you want to call them. Whatever framework, version of ADDIE framework I choose. We're using all those. And we try, in the textbooks, it's always so complicated. It just drives me nuts. Like, we are not brain surgeons, and the books are written like that, and it confuses the heck out of everyone. And it's just one of the reasons why we have so much bad instruction out there, and we have people confused about what ID really is. So my goal has been to break it down and make it super easy for you guys to get some of these more complicated, I don't even want to use that word, more complicated, but get some of these concepts. And hopefully, as my students are watching this, that this helps really break down and explain the importance and how you utilize instructional strategies in the process. All right, y'all. Hope y'all learned something. If you have any questions for me, obviously leave a comment. All right, later, everybody.